Lance Luce. Good to see you, Lance, on the Barton organ, trying to get us all warmed up. I appreciated your speed there at the end, Lance. Welcome, everyone, to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series, and thanks for all making it here on this cold day. What a great place to be on a cold day, though, the Michigan Theater. Today, we dig deep into the Stamp School's trove of talent and character to present one of Stamp School's own installation artist, Osman Khan. And opportunities to get a taste and some insight into the Stamp School presently abound, as you can see the work of alumni, faculty, and students all currently on display in Ann Arbor. At the Work Gallery, just around the corner on State Street, you can take in the work of Bill Lewis, who is not only a Stamp School alum, but also a faculty emeritus. The exhibition Bill Lewis, Fragments of the Great War, 1914 to 1918, has an opening reception this coming Tuesday, February the 3rd at 4:30 to 6:30, so you should check that out. And at the school itself, in the Art and Architecture building on North Campus, you don't miss the faculty exhibition, which is currently on display in the Slusser Gallery. And also on view, there's student work from the Ebola design charrette held last week, which brought students together with professionals and experts from across the university and to generate new design solutions specific to improving procedures in healthcare around the Ebola outbreak. That resulting work you can see in the Stamp School's first floor west corridor. So check it all out. One update from last week, which is also good Stamp School news. I mentioned last week that Phoebe Glockner, one of our professors, her graphic novel turned film, Diary of a Teenage Girl, was about to make its premiere at Sundance. It was bought by Sony's Pictures Classics for 7 figures. So, yeah. So I think that you will see that in a theater soon. So check that out. There will be a Q&A today directly following the talk here. You can come and meet Osman and ask him your questions in the screening room, out the doors to the left and down the hall. And now for a proper introduction of our guest today, please welcome artist, filmmaker, professor, and director of the Stamp School MFA program, David Chung.
Hello. Thank you, Christina. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Osman Khan. What a great name. His initials are OK. When I first heard that name, Osman Khan, I thought he might be a famous cricket star or maybe even a well-known actor from Lollywood, as the film industry is called in Pakistan. But instead, I found out that he is a star from the international art world. Several years ago, while I was traveling in Korea, I got an email from Osman due to monsoon season. And some years it's not so bad, but the year he visited, it rained for 5 weeks every day. And the day Osman arrived, it was a downpour for 3 days without let-up. And water was running down the walls of the gallery where he was installing. But I'm happy to report to you that all turned out well. The opening was a big success. Plenty of soju and barbecue was had by poetry disguised as a cartoon sheep. Osman reveals to us the new ways to consider these can only be understood using a digital camera, to building-sized installations such as the house made of fluorescent tubes that was featured in last year's Art Prize. Osman's work investigates our relationship with the built world and the world that we humans have made that exists in computer networks, software code, and robotics. In a way, with his current project, Osman is using the entire United States as his canvas. He has converted a rental truck into a version of a Pakistani truck and has driven it coast to coast as a performative work that documents our perceptions about culture and hybridity. Last year in a show at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit, Osman created an apartment in a giant glass-walled aquarium and slowly filled it with water, then drained it and refilled it. It was a depiction of decay that became a powerful commentary on the American dream. Equally deft at working in the hostile environment of the frozen Arctic Circle, as he is in the humid streets of Karachi, his observations about man's global presence are compelling and unforgettable. Osman Khan did his undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering at Columbia University and his Master's of Fine Arts from UCLA. He has been a visiting professor at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and his work has been shown at the Shanghai Biennale in China, Zero1 Festival in San Jose, the Center for Contemporary Art in Rotterdam, the OK Center for Contemporary Art in Austria, the Socrates Sculpture Park, SIGGRAPH, and a number of other exhibitions. He is the recipient of the Art Matters Grant. He has won the Ars Electronica Award of Distinction, and articles about his work have appeared in Art Forum, the Los Angeles Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Please help me in welcoming a great thinker and one of the best conceptual artists working today, Osman Khan.
Well, thank you, David. That was humbling. And thank you, Christina, and I want to thank also the STEM School, but especially I want to thank all of you guys for coming out on a kind of a bizarre day. So, of course, this is an interesting question, the day after I learned the world was round. You see, the world has always known about its roundness. In fact, by the 6th century BC, Pythagoras had already hinted at it, at the spherical nature of the world, and by the 2nd century AD, Ptolemy, among others, had the numbers to prove it. So this diagram is actually by the 11th century polymath al-Biruni, and it's a model to sort of estimate the circumference of the Earth. Kind of very straightforward and simple. So then the question asks, why am I just coming around to this discovery? You wouldn't be really all that wrong to think that I'm a bit slow. You see, I did my undergraduate in engineering. The notion of this discovery, however, feels really profound. Just think about it. The beautiful realization that there's no edge to fall off of. Wouldn't you just want to run everywhere, in every which direction, knowing that there is no end? Nothing but the infinitum of possibilities. But of course, what I am talking about is not the of geographies, that explorers, but rather a different journey, the encounters of and to the world through the lens of artistic practice. So I'm here to share basically a sampling of my work, my encounters with this round world of ours, encounters both personal and global, produced over the last 10 years, and shown roughly in a chronological order. Victor Schlosky suggests to make a stone stonier, that is the purpose of art. So let us now see how the stone becomes stonier and the world a bit rounder. So interesting question, right? What do we do? So I want to talk about sort of the first work I started to work on once in grad school. And of course, every generation both admires and admonishes the works preceding it. So after Cézanne painted this beautiful rendition, how should art be reconsidered for the 21st century? So the work I want to talk about, called Sur la Table, engages not only the new ideas of the still life, but also maybe how the audiences engages the work. Here sort of is the typical art opening, and if you notice, everyone is doing everything but looking at the work.
Sur la Table revisits the domestic situation of the table.
So I'm going to actually talk over this one. So to simplify, what Sur la Table allows for is any object, any colored object that's placed on the table literally bleeds its color down, allowing for this sort of interactive on the table. The setup is pretty straightforward. There's a camera looking at the scene. That image is sent to a computer, which is then projected back down. The tables are actually networked, so one image from one side can be then pushed to the other table and to many more if need be. Sulatab also challenges our notion. Let me try to get my mouse on the other side. And our relationship to the table by basically becoming a performative space where, again, if all the food is eaten, the performance of the table itself comes to an end. So I'm where we learned that video killed the radio star. So that's the image of the Buggles video of the same name, which was the first music video ever shown on MTV, which when MTV did show music videos mattered. Television in all its sort of passive analog glory was already the dominant media for my time. It was already established as the new hearth, and here we can even see the father blocking the old hearth in order to pay attention to the new. And the next few works that sort of look at television in a different way already acknowledge that this medium was at its last gasps. The information age of the 21st century and the digital technologies and network capabilities it brought already foretold the coming demise, or at least a transformation of this media. The first work sort of puts together two dead or even dying media, that of the Polaroid and the CRT television and the end of broadcast signal, that thing on the left. Some of you may have never actually have seen it. So believe it or not, if you bring the two together, that Bartlett Newman-like image suddenly comes to show a Rothko-like image when taken a photo of. Here's some more. So the next work, I'll move the sound again. So that was an exploration, sort of kind of an ode to structuralist filmmaking, but this time using the kind of the screen of the stage, as the name sort of alluded to, it was the last rites for the CRT. But I realized I was actually no longer interested in the apparatus of TV, which had already been really well covered by artists like Namjoon Paik and the Vasulkas, and kind of wanted to concentrate on the broadcast and its concerns. So this next work sort of talks to that.
We Interrupt, a regularly scheduled program, is a media installation that explores the social condition of the television and our relationship to it. The installation wishes to investigate the very nature of television, with its numerous channels, its ubiquity, and its perpetual flow. Television has become the dominant medium of mass communication and entertainment. It has also become both the new hearth as well as storyteller, around which new social constructs have emerged. It works as companion, as illumination, and even as mind-numbing drug. The installation setup is as follows. A television is placed facing the wall, its flickering glow reflecting off the wall, and its sound echoing in the space. Its broadcast signal is simultaneously sent to a computer, where customized software processes the broadcast in real time, collapsing every frame of the television image into a 1-pixel white slice. These slices are horizontally arranged in sequence and projected to the wall next to the television set, showing an abstracted history of the broadcast signal. Cinematic cuts are transformed into clear vertical sections. Zooms become visualized as curves. Commercials and music videos are seen as vibrant vertical patterns and hectic splashes of color, while news are seen as calming studies of horizontal smears. Visitors are encouraged to switch channels with a remote control and explore the relationship between the broadcast, its sound, and the projection.
So I already mentioned the demise of one media and the rise of a new king. By the turn of the century, the internet has come to be the primary aggregator, disseminator, and communicator of information. As we increasingly give dominance to information over materiality, for example, the Bush administration's decision to go to war based on information and not actual material proof proves that there are new forms of logic structures emerging. So there's a series of installation that I did that had sort of these 5 acts that explored this very notion. And they all shared the same interface, the swiping of your credit or debit card. I'm only going to talk about 2 of them for time's sake. This was the installation. And the work I want to talk about is called Net Worth. So Net Worth, which is the second act, the act of reflection, explores a new value system for our information-dependent society. Net Worth at one level wishes to explore current conditions where information is given more prominence than the corporeal. The monetary systems of the world are to be understood as really a vast accounting system, where money's exchange is actually data transferred. As such, entrance to the work, the card swipe, echoes a familiar interaction. However, the social condition of the swipe is subverted as means to explore another notion, that of information as body. ID cards, credit cards, and the like are already deemed more proof of person than the actual physical body itself. Add to this the existence of the internet and the action of Googling and entering our everyday language. New relationships between the corporeal and the virtual are created. New structures of social strata and value have emerged. On an experiential level, Net Worth also examined the individual's narcissism and hubris. Much like the Carnival Hammer hit game where physical muscle was tested, Net Worth gave chance for visitors to flex their data bodies. How do you rank against the Joneses, against your best friends, or against your favorite celebrity? So in Net Worth, the visitor is presented with a kiosk with a magnetic card reader that stands in front of a monolith-like structure. A projected image of various color fields is projected onto that monolith. The visitor is encouraged to swipe their purchase card, be it a credit card or ATM card. The visitor's name that is contained on that card is then parsed and then Googled. The positioning or ranking of their name appears vertically on the monolith projection, which represents the number of hits returned by Google on that individual's name. Their name appears on the projection among other visitors who have swiped, as well as some higher net worth individuals, celebrities, politicians, artists, and other famous figures.
No, how do you know?
So here we see a visitor sort of coming up to it. Asked to swipe her card. And believe it or not, or probably believe it, she doesn't get enough hits to even show up on the monolith. The next guy does a little better. Nothing to be too proud of.
Oh yeah, can you hear?
So I don't know if anyone knows Office Space, but he's the actor in there, so he's got some chops. So also are all the kind of sort of famous people. that were pre-fed into the system not only as a litmus test for the visitors, but also as a reflection on our social condition. And then what does it say about a society where Yoda ranks higher than Buddha? So the image there is of is a scene from Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life. If anyone remembers, this is where Nick the bartender starts giving out wings in the alternate timeline where George Bailey no longer exists. And kind of very similarly to that sort of system where as long as there's a bell ringing, angels are getting the wings, you can actually think of the GDP in a similar manner. Anytime a transaction happens, GDP goes up. In Con Artists, the artist directly appropriated the act and very systems of credit consumption. I registered as a validated merchant with fully operational credit processing machine and account. The artist or through a sales rep proxy asked the visitor to make a purchase. Though no product or service is returned in kind at the time of transaction, the visitor's purchase card will be charged an amount of money. A minimum of $1 was required. The artist's name then would show up on the itemized list of the visitor's monthly statement. And in a way, Con Artist plays to the logical conclusion of the capitalist game. Basically, it highlights the aesthetics of pure transaction as the apex.
So what do we do here?
How much would you like to be charged?
Uh,
Why don't you go ahead and swipe?
is a dollar okay?
$1 is great.
Okay. What do I do? Just like this?
Just like that. Please enter the amount. And please press the enter button.
Is this really charging?
It is. You will be. And then 30 days later, my name shows up on the itemized list. So here, I want to sort of talk about the next work. And the idea of alienation here refers to two things. One, Marxist theory that describes the alienation of the worker within a capitalist mode of production, mainly due to the invariable loss of the ability to determine their own life and destiny. The other, of course, is also an ode to the plight and rights of undocumented and migrant workers. Commissioned to do a work for the 01 Festival in San Jose. And sort of this is the work that sort of came out of that.
Scene, Fruits of Our Labor, is an interactive installation that reinvigorates a city plaza through an alternative form of communication between the general public. It was commissioned by the 01 San Jose Festival and installed in the public plaza in front of the San Jose Museum of Art, facing Cesar Chavez Park. The monolith is a communication device reminiscent of the ubiquitous obelisks, plaques, and sculptures that populate public squares. These traditional monuments carry messages that sanctify historical moments or a set of values upon which the city has been built. Similarly, Scene, Fruits of Our Labor, looks to broadcast a variety of unshared principles from the mouths of everyday citizens. These deal with their projected hopes and the American dream in light of globalization. The project asks members of three communities that make up San Jose's labor needs: Silicon Valley's tech workers, the undocumented service workers, and the outsourced call center workers one question: what is the fruit of your labor? Their responses are displayed back to the general public on an infrared LED screen whose content is visible only through the audience's personal digital capture devices. The 8-foot-tall, 4-foot-wide, 18-inch deep monolith screen is made from black acrylic embedded with infrared LEDs. To the naked eye, it is a blank surface, waiting for information to be carved on it. However, when viewed through any CCD device, digital cameras, digital video cameras, phone cams, its messages magically appear on the user's screen. It is only through a digital apparatus that the messages can be read. The audience is encouraged to photograph and share these messages, the fruits of others' labors. What was previously hidden from their view is revealed through the technical device. They become part in the most personal way to this exchange. The traditional role of the public plaza as the device through which citizens and institutions communicate to one another has long been superseded by mass communication, what McLuhan called the electronic agora. Seeing Fruits of Our Labors looks at the potential confluence of these two divergent technologies to reanimate public space. It initiates vibrant interactions between people, sharing their viewing devices with total strangers, discussing the streaming messages, and telematically sending their viewing experiences to others in their phone book. It also brings the voices of the marginalized, like the badly stigmatized workers, into the public arena and shows them to be no different from any others.
And of course, a lot of that was happening before the advent of the smartphone. So you see all these little flip devices. So another work that sort of came after, which dealt also with the idea of invisibility, but this time rather than looking at the abstraction of labor, commented on the built urban environment. So the placed a laser approximately about 10 feet above the Stone Arch Bridge in Minneapolis and continuously swept across a horizontal plane over the Mississippi River. The effect provided an invisible canopy across the space. Its only consistent perceptible cue was the horizontal line drawn across urban edifices. The only time the canopy, or in this case ceiling, becomes apparent was when particulates passed through that laser. This occurred frequently or infrequently depending on occurrences of natural phenomena. For example, spray from the river, fog, or dust. Or other infrastructural residues, steam from power plants or sewers, or provided by individuals, smokers, hot breath, or strategically placed fog machines. Seal simultaneously invokes its namesake verb to cover with the ceiling, a dyslexic spelling of the French word ciel, or sky, and its closed, or rather closed, homonym to seal. The project oscillating between being visible and invisible, a surreal rendition of a dystopic version of the sky above, an impenetrable shield or an inhibiting barrier. In exploiting the hide-and-seek nature of the laser beam, Seal plays with the public's perceptions of invisible forces. So here, as fog sort of emerges, we kind of see that invisible kind of layer come through. So the next work I want to sort of talk about had me thinking about concerns of energy consumption. Here's a sort of chart that talks about it. And I kind of wanted a way to sort of mediate maybe some of this. So in my infinite wisdom, I came up with this little child that suckles on an outlet and sort of poos out further electricity. But to make matters more interesting, he actually does suckle, and depending on how much power you're actually taking from the outlet, he suckles faster or slower. Interesting story, once I was taking the work to LA and actually got stopped by TSA, who called the bomb squad on me, and then proceeded to show the work to every TSA agent, who then, of course, looked at me, looked at the work, and questioned what my art was. So I'm not sure if it was because of this or what. I was actually commissioned to make a robot for the Robot 250 Festival in Pittsburgh. So thinking through, I started thinking about, how is the robot portrayed in popular culture? For those who might not know, the word robot actually comes out of Carol Čapek's play called Rossum's Universal Robots, and other things like Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? So how is the robot sort of portrayed in popular culture? The other thing is I cited the work to the Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens, so I started thinking about concerns there as well. Concerns like lawn ornament. How do you mow this grass? And also other allusions to sustainable practice of maybe using sheep to maintain to maintain the lawns. So of course, if you add it all up, there's only one natural conclusion: build a robotic sheep that cuts the grass. So that's actually Christian who won the award to name the sheep. And of course, he comes up with the greatest name, Mo. And again, you have to understand this is very close to Carnegie Mellon, where DARPA is funding these, let's just say, kind of other types of robots. So I was asked to do work at Socrates Sculpture Park, and sort of still thinking about how ideas of public intervention. I started sort of thinking what I might do there. Socrates is that green area to your right, and then right next to it is this big Costco. So the first thing I started thinking about was this idea of follies, and thinking what would be a modern folly be, right? So a folly might be defined as a useless building erected as ornament on a gentleman's estate. And Sir Hugh Casson says, the mark of a true folly is that it was erected to satisfy to the builder and to greatly surprise the stranger. And of course, there was, like I said, Costco next door. If we kind of rattle it all together, it becomes inevitable to put a fully functioning automatically sliding door in the middle of the park. And of course, if you're 2 years old, of course, you just walk right through it. So one of the most sort of surprising things, apart from the idiocy of actually using this as opposed to all the doors you normally walk through in Costco, was actually the disappointment of actually walking through this threshold. It's kind of interesting when you go through a threshold and you actually do not change space or your spatial condition, how let down you are. Here's the door on opening days. And then just on a kind of normal day. So I had the next works I want to talk about, which I kind of call the Arctic series. The following kind of projects were all realized during a 2-week residency in Svalbard, an archipelago of islands located north of Norway, kind of well within the Arctic Circle. So it's that little circle of islands, and then the big Arctic Circle is kind of defined by that other red line. The residency basically consisted of a 2-week journey in October 2009, and we traveled around a steel-hulled schooner that traveled the islands. So this was the map of the journey that we took, and this was our beautiful schooner. And just to prove that I was not in the Caribbean, but here's a chunk of glacier for you guys to see. And basically the boat would cast its anchor in a bay, and we'd make landfall by getting onto this small Zodiac boat. And there was plenty of snow and ice, and plenty of ice and snow, and islands and water, and more islands. So of course the first project I sort of set up was called WSSR, Solid State Radio. We set up a radio transmitter on the boat, and the station basically ran 24/7 and was offered as a forum to the others on the ship to amuse ourselves, play whatever we liked. Yes, we had breakfast playlists and a different set for dinner. We had hiking music and disco nights. Other times the station was used for more poetic gestures. Sounds of the Arctic day were played for the night and vice versa. The sound of the trawls played only to be heard by the crisp that is the Arctic. I like calling this a pirate radio station, but in reality, there was no piracy to be done. No laws to break, no FCC to Svalbard is very much a no man's land. The only discretion was the vulgarity of its introduction into the environment. The ability to break the serenity of nature, literally with radios playing hot blues of people not there. And we saw seals and walrus, and we saw more walrus. And I tried to introduce the hot sounds of Caesarea Vora. They were not amused. And we saw glaciers, and we saw polar bears, and we saw polar bears eating carcasses of whales. So Beyond the Pale comes as a response in its double entendre to the fact that the warming of the climate has created a situation where grizzly bears are now migrating northward and competing for resources in what was formerly only polar bear habitat. The projection of an all-too-human response, xenophobic and racist, onto this situation acts to highlight the situation in an overtly provocative, albeit tongue-in-cheek gesture. But it also alludes to a more familiar resistance to another brown and black northerly movement, that of in traditionally white Europe and America. "40 years later, this next project, Kool-Aid Rundown, seeks to revisit and replace the hyper-masculine gesture of Robert Smithson's Asphalt Rundown, where basically he dumped all this asphalt from a large dump truck and wanted to substitute it instead of with asphalt, but with a kind of high fructose substitute. Wanting to pour Kool-Aid powder over a large ice form, here Smithson's gesture is emasculated through the use of impermanent materials and pop campiness. One imagines Kool-Aid! Oh yeah! The Kool-Aid man jumping out of the glacier yelling his "oh yeah" slogan. The desire to introduce a large red popsicle, it seems so obvious, into the otherwise monochrome and austere environment is ultimately by the process of its own making. Rather than offer the brightly colored aesthetic of popsicles, the work finds itself transformed into something organic and symbolic, speaking to the archipelago's history of whaling, alluding to the butchered bodies that once soiled these very beaches. A major consequence of global warming, as we know, is that the ice caps are melting. Large chunks of ice are breaking off, drifting and melting into warmer waters. Icebound is an intervention where broken icebergs were tied back together. The action mimics the heroics in that American folktale of a young Dutch boy who saves his village from catastrophe by sticking his finger into a leaking dike. A gut response, an act of desperation of the individual in face of calamity, however, in my case, inconsequential, to save the ice from drifting into warmer oceans and melting. Icebound is a symbolic gesture that plays with the heroics, through the gestures of heroic pathos and a jester's sense of humor. So these are some of the bound ice. Myself trying to do it. Of course, in retrospect, the stupidity of the act, using a hand drill while you're on a rubber boat, dawned on me. And so we leave Svalbard at the Arctic Circle and return back to the mainland. So in 2009, the summit took place at the David Lawrence Convention in Pittsburgh, where G20 leaders representing 80% of the world's wealth determined policies affecting our economic and financial futures. The talks and economic decisions are not open to the public, and only filtered information is disclosed to media and public. The city of Pittsburgh, in response to fears of protest and unrest, and in the name of safety, here's an image from the G20 the year prior in London, cordoned off actually most of downtown Pittsburgh from the public, keeping protesters, concerned citizens, or the general public far away from the center. So to foster engagement, despite the insularity of this talks, I worked with the folks at Alliance to develop Hey G20 as a forum that allowed concerned citizens to voice their thoughts and opinions to the leaders of the G20 summit. The project was an interactive installation that took place during the G20 summit in the windows of the Alliance offices located directly across from the Pittsburgh Convention Center. The installation was a guerrilla action against the city's rigid measurements to restrict voices of protest. Basically, interested participants were asked to tweet their messages to Hey G20, whereby their message was encoded into Morse code and then transformed into a multicolored light show that projected both individuals' messages to members of the summit across the river. Looking like just a disco show, in reality, the piece illuminated not only the night sky, but also the concerns of the world's citizens. So that's sort of that tweeted message being converted into Morse code. So of course, thinking about G21 may not actually be all that wrong to blame the covert goings-on at a summit like that in assisting with what would eventually become our mortgage crisis and the rise to our recession. Neighborhood in Detroit. This, as well as other ongoing economic downturns, which have been acutely seen in the loss of neighborhoods of many depressed US towns and cities, highlights the true fragility of that most American of dreams, that of house and home. The home manifested as house becomes personal and personalized, its acquisition paramount to obtaining domestic harmony. The ethos of the American dream itself is encased in ideas of home, or more accurately, house ownership, a proxy for achieving the promised prosperity, self-fulfillment manifested in material acquisition. It is precisely this sheltered domestic condition that Anthony Vidler suggests that the Freudian uncanny, which is kind of the opposite of the sublime, has found its metaphorical home in the house. Haunted or not, that pretends to afford the utmost security while opening itself to the secret intrusions of terror. This bourgeois anxiety, a dread perhaps, that the house home, the bastion that maintains domestic bliss, can any moment be transgressed, be violated and lost. Its safety and sanctity profaned by what lies beyond its wall, be it disaster or malice. It is no wonder that so many horror stories erupt in the house. So the first work kind of responds to this condition sort of set up. So house responds primarily by its use in fluorescent glass tubes as a structural material in the construction of this simple representation of a house. An inherently stable construct made from inherently delicate materials, a stone's throw from being destroyed, highlight the fragility of the house, the physical part of it. But this proverbial glass house flickers its lights on and off in what at first seems like a random strobic pattern, eventually settles into blinking in Morse code again, the last lines of UNESCO's rhinoceros. I'm not capitulating. The house, structurally tenuous yet determined, stands surrounded by the ever-threatening imagined rhinoceroses. Here, perhaps no longer UNESCO's metaphors for the perceived threat of fascism, but allusions to contemporary forces that jeopardize the house, the home, the American dream. And here are sort of different variations on that installation done in different places. In Newark, at MOCAD here in Detroit, outside in Detroit for the Electricity Festival. And at the Frederik Meijer Gardens in Grand Rapids. And here we can sort of see how it sort of flickered on and off in Morse code. So the next work I want to talk about is the destruction of the house of Abu al-Ash. The house referred in the title is the home of Dr. Azoluddin Abu al-Ash, an Israeli-trained doctor and peace activist who had been involved in promoting joint Israeli and Palestinian projects. It and his family were destroyed when his 3 daughters and a niece were killed by an Israeli Defense Force shell. The work is an animation generated by the customized computer program, featuring a perpetual and virtual rain of debris, as if plummeting from a bombed roof or dark sky. This debris can only be seen on a monitor mounted above the viewer's head. The audience experiences both an actual physical threat of perhaps the falling monitor, or through the representation threat displayed on the actual screen. Both strain our necks and our comprehension as the rubble is converted into abstract geometric volumes. Through deliberate erasure of telling detail, these seemingly anonymous fragments might be from any war. The next work in this series is called There Are Times I Lose Faith. A 12-foot by 6-inch by 6-inch beam floats suspended in the air. A stainless steel tether, its only attachment to the ground. Then without notice or warning, the beam comes crashing down. An individual tries to labor the beam back to its position. The damage to, and I'll let this. The damage to the base and the beam physically attests to the psychological ravages, the ups and downs of finding and losing faith. There are times I lose faith uses physical phenomena as metaphor to speak to both the magical situation that is faith, manipulating magnetism and defying gravity, and the consequence of its failure. The sculptor is abstracted to allow its minimalist shape to speak more to its action than to any particularities of form. As such, the piece addresses the magic and the failure of that leap of belief in God, in the spiritual, in leaders, in governments, in corporations, and yes, even in love, and the consequences of its failings, and ultimately the labor required to reestablish it. So the final work in the series is called Come Hell or High Water. So the installation Come Hell or High Water explores the domestic uncanny as aesthetic performance, where the physical damages to the house reveal the larger social and psychological anxieties of our contemporary condition. We might think of it as a very near future where our relationship with floods will be much closer than we think. This is an image from Hurricane Sandy in New Jersey. The installation setup was basically this 8-foot by 6-foot by 6-foot vitrine, initially showcasing a section of an intact living room, a simulacrum of the typical average American house. The color of the room and carpet was based on the best-selling paints and best-selling carpets from Home Depot. The room is flooded and drained periodically during the duration of the exhibition. And very fortunately, the Titanic sank so perfectly. the flooding, the timing, and the amount is determined through a heuristic algorithm that takes into account global tidal patterns, regional meteorological forecasts, and CO2 levels in the exhibition space. The effect of the simulated deluge is allowed to wreak havoc onto the room. Its entropic performance on display for all to see. The work, with allusions to Hans Hacke's condensation cube, performs not only to its own hermetic condition, but talks to larger concerns of global warming, if read literally, and other perceived or unknown impeding disasters, a more metaphoric take that disrupts and destroys the safety and sanctity of the domestic condition, especially within the context of the American dream. The title of the work, Come Hell or High Water, affixed in gold foil letters to the underside of a side table, sporadically exposed itself, bobbing up and down the water every now and then. And it can be read beyond its pun in either two ways, cynically as a pathetic gusto now drowned in its own hubris, or as a heroic prophecy that even with the room destroyed, memories washed away, the house fallen, the dream of home is imperishable. And this is sort of a photo of, after 2 months of this deluge, what is sort of the result, what is left over of that room. So I think David sort of mentioned that I was born in Pakistan and came to the US at a very young age. And very much like a lot of immigrants, there's a constant sort of negotiation between the idea of home and homeland. And sort of the next series of works are sort of exploring that idea. So the first work I want to talk about is called Noor, which in Arabic or in Urdu means light. So the oversaturation of media images and coverage of already drawn out wars and its effects on the local populations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, having worn out their novelty not only for headlines but also in the minds of the US population, Noor proposed to replace ineffective and overlooked media imagery with a different sensory response. The project interfaces via computer, microcontroller, and solid-state relay the overhead lights in the gallery. The lights are normally off, illuminating only when a signal is received from a computer that is keeping track of deaths that are due to US engagements in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. The gesture and undesired illumination onto the otherwise purpose dark space highlights the realities of this conflict, the tragedy of collateral deaths, the spectacle neutered by its horrific content. Multitudes of binaries abstracted into the simple turning on and off of lights. And dread, life and death, one disturbance for another, one wasted resource for another. So the day after Haroon Baloch came up with a bright idea for his kebab stand, he decided to call it a McDonald's. And what I want to actually allude to is not so much Haroon Baloch's wisdom, but rather ideas that talk about the spread of sort of the global capitalist culture that's sort of pervasive. Antonio Gramsci has this idea of what's called cultural hegemony, which basically describes that the domination of a culturally diverse society is by the ruling class, who manipulate the culture of that society. The beliefs, the explanations, perceptions, values, and mores. So basically, such that the ruling class worldview becomes the worldview that is imposed and accepted as the natural norm. So when we think about it, coming back to our present globalized kind of world, who controls and manipulates the worldview? So the next project that again David had alluded to, called Indus Truck Works and the Indus Truck Decor Corporation, revolve around reflections on and projections of hyphenated Pakistani identity. Arguably, Pakistan is the quintessential postmodern third world nation, divorced from its own history by partition, teetering on political and economic collapse, battered by Cold War politics, a pariah nation to some and a septic to others. The nation birthed into potential possibilities is now clinging for a reason to be. at odds in constructing its own identity, reject the West, rejoice the West, adopt the imagined East, and filled with a people in desperate need to find something to be proud of. And to this, the hyphenated Pakistani finds only thorny entanglement, where one exists in a perpetual contradictory state. As such, the project is an exploration of Homi Bhabha's notion of third space, where possible reconciliation of conflicting ideologies and identities may find respite through strategies of hybridity. The transport truck here, you could take a look at one of the original ones, holds a particular and substantial place in Pakistan's visual landscape and cultural identity. So just to clarify, this is the normal trucks of Pakistan. It's not an art truck. This is what you'd find on any street and highway. The Pakistani truck is a cultural vehicle. It carries in it and on it an array of cultural messages and expectations. These riotous, hypergraphical trucks are imaged and messaged with the hopes, beliefs, aspirations, and cultural reflections of not only owners and truck painters, but by proxy of Pakistani society as a whole. So in transferring the familiar iconography of one culture, those colorful and exquisite patterns and designs of Pakistani trucks onto another, the arguably blander American cousin, the modality of the project's gesture, the placing of unfamiliar iconography onto US trucks, asserts to introduce these images today, allowing them to become just another part of the saturated visual landscape as the trucks crisscross the nation, and then subversively insert aspects of this other into the American vernacular. As such, the gesture also addresses ideas of cultural loss to minority communities, in this case, the Pakistani American. Whereas the decorated trucks, a ubiquitous sight in Pakistan, is now lost. Who must, here's some more images. And then you get sort of these nice, weird juxtapositions, that slippage of language. So the Indus truck was used as kind of the main transport for the last project I want to talk to, and I'll probably have to rush through it a little bit, called It's All the Rage. Between East and West seemingly lies conflict, or maybe more accurately, the conflicted. The exhibition sits between reflection and action to address the concerns of a newly emerging Muslim, and more specifically, hyphenated Pakistani identity, and the political, cultural, and aesthetic repercussions of this experience. The title of the exhibition alludes to the overwrought and hostile sensationalism of the September 2012 Newsweek Muslim Rage cover story. You can see it to your right. And rebrands its confrontational stance into the nuanced reality of the exhibition's double entendre. 200 plus years of colonialism, Cold War manipulations, political double standards, IMF strong-arming, drone strikes, media misrepresentations, on the one hand, have led to systemic suspicion and anger at Western interference, fermenting internalized desires for the Muslim world to enter into the modern world on its own terms. You see, it's our party, and you are not invited. Internally, the party is a rager. Mullahs and MCs, Islamists and secularists, police and polis, mosque and disco, and everyone in between all vie with bullet or ballot the right to define a people. The exhibition itself unfolded in multiple parts, via the truck, the transport, and installation, each in their own manner addressing the ambiguities of this condition, the externalized conflict versus the internalized uncertainty, fabricated realities versus constructed mythologies, East versus West, aesthetics versus politics, trying for a renegotiation of this fractured identity. The installation was grounded in current Muslim and Pakistani identity politics vis-a-vis the world and, of course, the artists, and literally found the spatial condition of the gallery divided into, where you can see the two spaces here. The overarching stance of the works presented blurs the overarching sense of the works presented blurs aesthetic gestures within the context of current political repercussions, where the benign gesture of drawn lines reverberate the traumas of colonial partition, where minimalist structure gives sway to political overlay, where jokes and terror intermingle, where want of polemics gives way to hazy poetics. The work presented reflects on the affliction, ambiguity, and aspirations currently at play, uncertainty and providing no resolution. It is the current condition. It's what is going on. It's all the rage. So when you enter the gallery, this is sort of what you first see, these two piles and an image sort of at the wall, on that wall, and the sort of Orientalist gray wall behind you. The image is, of course, kind of this innocent-looking magazine that might show up in your mail, which, of course, perpetuates the idea of the Muslim community as the barbarian and the West as the enlightened. To add to that, of course, in tongue-in-cheek, a magazine is burned and thrown at the wall. On the other side, there's a line drawing, a simple drawing of just a line that refers to what's called the Radcliffe line. And then parallels between the basic aesthetic gesture of a drawn line is made with the colonial mark makings of territories and are eventually brought together into this line as a representation of the 17 August 1947 boundary demarcation line between India and Pakistan. So basically what it is this was Greater India during the British rule, the colonial rule, and the line basically demarks, is basically the line that now separated India from what is now Pakistan. Named after Sir Cyril Radcliffe, the chairman of the Border Commission, the original line was drawn in haste and indifference to the local population, so much so that villages were cut in half. Radcliffe had never even visited the subcontinent prior to this commission. Typically, the association of conflicts and wars and their instrumentation, typically bombs, bullets, and other armaments, is brought to a new perspective by featuring original and reproductions of the instruments used to make the original 1947 Radcliffe line, including the blue-red editorial pencil used by Radcliffe himself. Indeed, the pen is mightier than the sword, and when held by the bureaucrats, accountants, and cartographers, is arguably the true instruments of realism. In the middle of the room are two piles. The first, called Issue 2 Drone Score, basically is a kind of play on the word drone, where on one side the drone refers to the unmanned aerial vehicle that is sort of famous for its sort of as a mechanism of surveillance, telematic violence, and killing. And the other drone, which refers to music, is a harmonic or monophonic effect, accompanied where a note or chord is continuously sounded through most or all pieces. So the notion of drone is observed in this representation of mark making. Tallies that highlight the total number of deaths resulting from US military drone strikes in Pakistan, Yemen, and Sudan. And this is countered with the musical notation of Lamont Young's composition number 7. Interestingly, a perfect fifth, and written as, I don't know if you can read it, to be held for a long time, which suddenly changes its tune when you see it in line with the 5 ticks that make up a tally mark of death. The other pile refers to, of course, the 779 Muslim men who have been brought to Guantanamo Bay, basically the detention camp without due process. Conditions and treatments of those prisoners at the camp have been deemed violations of international law. The fence sort of in the back, the sort of gray mass there, basically alludes to the West Bank barrier erected by Israel along and within the Palestinian territory of the West Bank. This offensive segregation, referred to as the apartheid wall by the Palestinian, is also seen to be an illegal attempt to annex Palestinian land. On that wall is this inscription, "Will you be my Palestine?" and echoing Blake's call for Jerusalem, the Chechen poet Musa Geshev, desiring his own people to wake up for self-representation, wrote, "Will you be my Palestine? So I may have someone to live for, so I may have someone to long for, so I may have someone to cry for, so I may have someone to die for. Will you be my Palestine?" And this wall bit that basically
My funny Valentine.
dissects the space is reinforced with the melancholic sounds of Chet Baker's My Funny Valentine, both now united in their sadness.
You make me smile with my heart.
And then you travel sort of around the wall through that small crack to encounter quite a different world. The ambiguity of kind of the internalized conflict is played out with various sort of installations. I'm running slightly out of time, so I'm going to go quickly through them. More show them, and maybe in the Q&A we can go ahead and talk deeper about it. So here, a fly so easily swatted away finds empathy and sympathy when entered into bondage. A mural that talks about this condition. And I do want to pull attention to this one video pulled from it's a segment from a bigger Lollywood movie, sort of a brown exploitation movie from Pakistan. And I want you to pay attention to those Quranic drones that are basically killing the corrupting infidel, especially when you think about the drone strikes on the other side. Or this work called Muslim Center, which basically puts this black cube, which might have its nod to Juddean sort of minimalism, but of course references the Kaaba. The cube is built with the same proportions, and it is the literal center. But here it's sort of juxtaposed with a photo of a Muslim community center in Detroit, which basically asks the question, where is the Muslim center? Far away Arabia, or the mosques around the center? Or this work where the compass used by Muslims to find Kaaba, the direction to Kaaba, is now into an app, which points not to Kaaba, but to the beloved. And the last work I just want to talk about is this one called Tipu's Tiger, referencing the 18th century automaton created by Tipu Sultan that depicted a carved and painted wood tiger that savages a near life-size European man. The toy also contained an 18-note pipe organ. Here, the versioned system serenades the exhibition with the sounds of the azan, which is what you're listening to now, qawwalis, ghazals, and other sounds in the East. And like it says, mullahs and disco, they go hand in hand. And so we find the Indus truck returning the exhibition and continuing its journey across the American landscape.
His skull a blazer, his eyes are
So look for me on the asphalt byways and make sure to stick out your thumb, and I'll be sure to take you for a ride. Thank you.